Chapter 3. Stranger's Story. "But how could anyone get hold of your designs?" George asked Mr. Reese. He had collapsed into a chair and buried his face in his hands. I don't know, he kept repeating. "We have very tight security in the office." "Maybe that's part of the answer," Nancy said. She was about to inquire into his staff, but realized she ought to wait until after the fashion show. The sponsors had lost a precious contribution when the designer pulled out so abruptly, and she was determined to do all she could to reverse the effect. "Please, let me go on," Nancy begged the man. "And have these clothes photographed for the Millington catalog too? Never." "But the damage has already been done," Nancy said. She thrust the catalog under the man's nose and pointed to a picture of a skirt and jacket that closely resembled the one she wore. "That's right," Aunt Eloise, who was standing in the doorway, chimed in. "And to disrupt every—" Her voice broke off as tears welled up in her eyes. She started to walk away when Marjorie Tyson strode past her, carrying a message. "Maybe this will change your mind," she said confidently. Mr. Reese glanced at the folded paper with disinterest. "Please, read this," the woman persisted. As he opened it, Nancy could not help seeing that it was a request to buy the same outfit she had modeled only a short while ago. "Zoe Babbitt is an old customer of mine," the man mumbled, referring to the signature on the note. "Then," Nancy said hopefully. "Yolanda, get the organza!" Mr. Reese demanded, and the stylist hurried off. Instantly, Aunt Eloise threw her arms around his shoulders and planted a kiss on his cheek. "You're wonderful," she said gaily. "Oh, stop it," he replied in embarrassment. "And hurry up." "Thank you," Aunt Eloise said quietly. She and Marjorie followed Bess and George back to the ballroom, leaving Nancy to attend to the next change of clothing. As before, the second outfit fit almost perfectly. This time, however, Nancy winced as Yolanda drew the long zipper over her waist and up the back. "Can you breathe?" Yolanda teased, noting the pinch in the midriff. "Barely," Nancy replied hoarsely. She didn't dare relax for fear she would split a seam. "What do you think, Mr. Reese?" Yolanda asked when the girl stood before him at last. Instantly, he noticed the thin crease in the waistline, but a glance at his watch made him admit, "I'm afraid we haven't time to fix it." Then, as if a bolt of lightning had struck, he snapped his fingers. "Wait a minute," he said, and dived into a nearby box filled with assorted buttons and ribbons. He pulled out a long, wide band of grosgrain that was the same shade of lilac as the gown. "Perfect," Yolanda said. She tied it into a pretty bow around the girl's waist, then quickly pinned Nancy's hair back, letting only a few wisps play against her cheekbones. It was no surprise to either Mr. Reese or his assistant that the young model was greeted with loud applause. Nancy was stunning and sailed down the runway as if she had done it many times. The remaining two outfits, a tailored white suit and a silk hostess gown, were equally popular. When Nancy stood at the end of the platform for the last time, a camera flashed in the back of the room, drawing her attention there. Not far from where the flash had come stood a woman in a dappled fur coat, thrown casually over her shoulders. "That looks like Jacqueline Henry," Nancy thought. She was tempted to stare, but forced herself to turn instead and walked slowly toward the curtain, where she posed once more before exiting. "Wasn't she marvelous?" the hostess said to the audience over the microphone, bringing another round of applause for Nancy. But the girl detective heard only an echo of it as she rushed back to the dressing room to change into her own skirt and blouse. She wondered if Bess and George had spotted the model too. However, before she could consider the possibility further, she found herself surrounded by Mr. Reese and several young women. All of them complimented her profusely. "Miss Drew," Mr. Reese said with an air of formality, "will you help me find the thieves?" "I was just about to ask you for your business card," Nancy replied, smiling. She pulled away long enough to slip into the clothes she had brought from Aunt Eloise's, then emerged to face Mr. Reese once again. "Where are you running to, Nancy?" he asked inquisitively, adding, "I'd like to talk with you if you can spare a minute." Nancy glanced past the man in preoccupation. She was eager to find Jacqueline Henri, but decided not to mention anything to Mr. Reese. "Perhaps we could discuss the theft tomorrow," she suggested, smiling politely. "I may have to leave on business," was the reply. "Can't we—" The girl detective broke in gently. "On second thought," she said, "I wonder if you would draw me some rough sketches of the dresses that were stolen tonight." "Of course, I'd be glad to, but—" "And jot down the type of material you used for each one," Nancy concluded. "Now, I really must get back to the ballroom." As she hurried toward the corridor, Mr. Reese told her he would have the sketches ready by morning. "Great!" Nancy called back. Her feet picked up speed as the sound of music drifted into the lobby, but when she stepped into the ballroom, she halted immediately. What if Jacqueline had left? She trained her vision on the couples who were dancing, then shifted it to the tables. Bess and George waved to her, but Nancy did not see them. Instead, she was struck by the sight of a dappled fur coat on a nearby chair. "That's Jacqueline!" Nancy gasped to herself when the young woman seemed to appear from nowhere. "Miss Henri!" Nancy exclaimed, running to her. "We've been worried sick about you." The puzzled expression that greeted her prompted Nancy to explain the comment. She introduced herself as Eloise Drew's niece. "I tried to be here on time for the show," Jacqueline said, "but couldn't make it. I phoned your aunt, but she had already left." "I'm sure she'd like to talk to you now," Nancy said. Her sentence was interrupted by an announcement over the loudspeaker. "Will Jacqueline Henri please come to the desk?" The young woman looked worried and tense. "That's for me," she said. "I'll have to go now." "Is something the matter?" Nancy asked, sensing that there was. "No, I'll call your aunt tomorrow." But before the model was able to excuse herself, Bess and George had joined the two. "Oh, Miss Henri! It's a pleasure to meet you," Bess called out, extending her hand at the same time. Jacqueline's was cold and clammy. "Wasn't Nancy wonderful?" Bess rambled on until her cousin spoke. "We wondered what had happened to you," George said. "Why didn't you come to work?" I couldn't," Jacqueline said. "Something terrible happened, and—" She broke off and started to turn away from the trio. Nancy gently put her hand on the model's arm. "Maybe we can help?" Jackie shook her head. "No, you can't," she answered. "It's about my brother. He may have been kidnapped." End of Chapter 3.